Hello, welcome back to my channel. I have a massive pile of palettes in front of me. We are going to do the video if I could only keep one palette from each brand. I believe I've done this in the past. I couldn't tell you how long ago it was, if it was a year or 2 years, what it was. I got the idea from Rachel. I think her last name is pronounced Palermi. I will link her video down below. And then I also saw Betty Jean from Batty Bean do it. So I will link both of their videos because this was not an original idea, but I have done this one before. So it's one of those, every time I do it, the palettes could probably change. I've already decluttered for the year. So everything I have, I like, or at least I'm interested in enough to keep it. And then my criteria, in Rachel's video, she had to have at least 2 palettes. Betty Jean did brands that she had at least 5 from. I decided to go with brands that I have at least 3 palettes to choose from. So you won't see Blend Bunny and you won't see Lethal Cosmetics because I only own 2 palettes from each of those. So if there's those are the ones off the top of my head. So if you don't see other brands that you know that I have, it's because I didn't have at least 3 palettes from. I do think as I was going through to pull the palettes for this, that it would be easy to do the counterpart where if I had to declutter a palette from each brand. So I may do that one. Let me know if you want to see that. But yeah, if you want to see the palettes that I picked, then just keep on watching. If you are new, welcome. Make sure you subscribe and let's jump into the video. Okay. So again, the rules I set for myself was I had to have at least 3 palettes from each brand. I have done, I think when I did it the last time, I had to have at least 2 palettes because obviously you can't pick one if you only have one. But just to cut down the amount that I had to pull, I decided to up it just a little bit. I don't own a ton from a bunch of brands. Betty Jean, I think, had 12 or 15. I obviously have more than that. There's 3 piles here. So if I do this again in the future, I may up it to 5, but for right now, I had to have at least 3. So these are in no particular order. These are piled to where they wouldn't fall over. So there is no order other than that because I had them over on the other side of the room. So first off, we have LA Girl. I have a bunch of these little, what are these, 4 pans? And then I was just thinking, I think I have one of their bigger. I think that's LA Girl also, but I decided to pick one of these. I travel with these quite a bit. The packaging for being plastic is pretty sturdy. And I like the shimmers in all of these for like one shadow. If you want to do a little bit of a color in the crease and then one shadow all over the lid, they're really easy for that. That's the way I tend to use them. And I went with the pink one just because this is the one I reach for the most. It was between this one and the green that has kind of a like khaki color in it. Those are the 2 most used, but I decided to go with the pink one. So there's that. I'm going to try and not speak on each palette too much, and I'm going to try and not swatch too much. Gourmand Girls, when I pulled these, the 3rd palette hadn't come in yet. If you watched my haul video, you will have seen that I got the newest one that they launched. I put it away. No, I didn't. It's in a stack over there for another video. I can't remember what it's called, but because I knew that one was coming, I technically had 3 palettes, so I cheated a little bit with Gourmand Girls, but surprisingly, I decided to keep the Haunted palette. I love the color story of the Spooked palette. I didn't necessarily love the matte formula in that when I first got it, but I had also just had a baby. And I don't remember what primer I was using. I do think their formula works better with a wet base, and I really like using a white base with their shadows to really make them pop. So I have liked their formula more since figuring that out. And their shimmers are really neat, and all their palettes generally have a couple of duochromes and then some metallics, but I used this one a lot this past fall, winter. I know in October I used it at least 3 times, which is a lot for me, especially for a brand new palette. So even though I really, really like the Spooked palette, it's traditional Halloween colors, I just, as much as I use this, I could not pick this one. So there is that. Wicked Widow, I do own 3 now. I own all 3 of their 8 pans, and I went with, again, a Halloween palette. The packaging alone, Frankenstein is my favorite like Universal monster. And I just love the Frankenstein, the Bride of Frankenstein aesthetic. I have a bunch of Frankenstein decor upstairs in my living room, which is why you don't see much down here. And I really like this grungy color story. So out of the 3, I was between this one and the Tea Time palette, which is funny because that's the most recent one and that took me the longest to acquire, but I couldn't not pick this one. So I went with Graveyard Smash. I think they are planning on restocking this. The Edward Scissorhands 2 palette is restocking. I forgot to ask about this, so I will ask. The owner's pretty good if you message or ask questions about responding, so I'm going to ask about this one because I'm hoping at least in October they restock it. Makeup Revolution, I don't use the palettes that I have hardly ever, so the only reason I picked this one is because my husband bought this for me. This is the Chilled palette, and it's made with cannabis sativa, or it's the cannabis, it says with cannabis sativa, so I don't know, is there cannabis in this? I'm not really sure. It's the green palette. Again, my husband picked it out. It's got some browns in it. I've never used it. I've never used the one that's in the Batman and Catwoman packaging. I've used my Self palettes, but I have not used them in a hot minute. So again, there's not really a whole lot of emotional attachments to the palettes from this brand. The other one that I was on the fence about was the Monsters Inc. little scare card palette that I have, but I went with this one just because the formula in these is a little bit better than some of their other palettes that they put out. Dominique Cosmetics, again, I own 3, so I went with the Celestial Storm. I'm kind of back in my bright colored phase, and this has some neutrals, some bright colors. I used to own, I think it was this big. BoxyCharm did like a mini version of this palette a couple years ago, and I liked it so much I hunted this down. I was able to get it on Poshmark a little bit marked down. I don't know if this palette is still available, but the mini one was the Celestial Thunder. That's easier to get a hold of than this one, and I think it's only missing 4 shades. I don't remember which. Yeah, I want to say it looked like this, but you can find that one on Poshmark. I had a harder time when I bought this one secondhand, tracking this one down, but I liked that one enough to buy the full size. Funny enough, I used the mini one a lot, and then when I got this one, I moved on to other things, so I think I've only used this one once or twice, but I still have it, and I won't get rid of it. Pinky Rose, I think I have 4 palettes from this brand. I have not used a single one of them. I got these through BoxyCharm. They were discounted. So this is the 80s, baby. The 80s is my favorite decade, so partially for the packaging, and then I like the color story of this. You've got some purples, some warm shades with the reds, the yellow, the pop of blue. It's an interesting color story. The shimmer formula on this is more like a traditional shimmer, what shimmers used to be. So it's not overly sparkly, overly metallic. They're pretty, but they're not, like I said, overly anything. So that may be why. Several of the palettes from them have pressed glitters. I think 2 of the 4 have pressed glitters. This one and the Peacock, Exotic Peacock, I think is what it's called, don't, but the other 2 do, which will give you some extra sparkle. But yeah, out of the 4, I decided to pick this one. I have 2 ABH. I picked one in this size, and then I picked one of the larger Norvina palettes. Technically, they're both owned by ABH, but some people consider these plastic ones as like a sister company almost. So I picked 2, a little sneak peek there. But I went with Sultry. I picked this one because it kind of gives, when I was looking at my Huda Beauty palettes, I was looking at the mini smoked palette, and I decided not to pick that one for my Huda Beauty palette. And I ended up going with this one because this one will do what the smoked palette does and then a little bit more. So that was the reasoning. I do like the Jackie Aina quite a bit, but I don't reach for these hardly at all. And I just figured if the smoked palette was not going to be chosen, this would kind of fill the void of that. Because this is the kind of palette that I reach for around Christmas sometimes, and then closer to New Year's Eve is I tend to kind of do these sultry, sparkly, smoky looks. So that's why I picked that. Give Me Glow. Again, I have 3 exactly, and I went with the Christmas Morning. This was my first Give Me Glow palette, and I just love, this was when brands were not doing a lot of Christmas theme palettes, and I just love the duochromes and the metallics that are in here, and the mattes are really nice. I probably should have picked, spoiler, I did not pick the Rudolph palette for my ColourPop palette, and I'm thinking maybe I should have, because I generally use that palette with this, so in this universe, I would be a little sad not to have that, but I think I could be okay. Kaleidos. I decided to go with the Club Nebula. This was a collab with Angelica Nyquist. It's an older palette, but it's still really pretty. She did a good job with this one. So, picked that. Let's see. For Jeffree Star, I decided to go with the Alien. I don't use this one as often as I used to, and it's probably not my very favorite anymore. The Jawbreaker palette is probably my favorite, but this is definitely still up there in the top 5, and I would be sad if this one wasn't around more so than the Jawbreaker, because I do have actually another rainbow palette in here, so I decided to keep Alien instead of Jawbreaker because I didn't think that I needed 2. In this universe, like, these would be the only palettes that I owned, I think is the way the scenario works. So even though I have palettes from brands where I obviously couldn't pick one, but I think in the universe of these videos, these are the only palettes that I would own. Shroud, again, I have 3, and I decided to go with the Halloween just because it's a really fun Halloween color story, and I think because I didn't keep the Spooked palette, this kind of, again, filled the void. There's some really cool duo multi-chromes in here. Black Flame is a multi-chrome. It's really pretty. I don't want to go in too hard because Shroud shimmers are really soft, but it's got a really, like, green, purple, kind of black shift. I don't know if my lighting is going to do it justice at all, but it's a really, there we go, interesting shadow. So again, this palette kind of fills the void of not having, oh, I do still have a wet wipe, not keeping Spooked. So, and I like the color story of this. It's a really grungy, fun Halloween color story. She did, Baddie Bean did a good job. So there's that. Unearthly was hard because I was between the Sleepover palette and this one, and I decided to go with this one. So this is Leather and Lace. It's a very fall palette to me, but I like that you've got, you know, light to deep in the color variants, and then these are shimmers. So it's a very, like, easy, beginner friendly, like, color and layout. Going from dark to light. What am I trying to say? Yeah, it's a very beginner friendly layout because you can obviously mix and match, but if you're not sure, you just stick with the rose. So I like this one. It's pretty. From Odin's Eye, Angelica's Hella palette is one of my favorites. Again, top 5, but my absolute favorite is still the Merry Christmas, which surprised me how much I like this color story, how much I use it all year. I travel with this palette a lot. There's just something about it where, yes, it's Christmas colors, but with a twist. So it's not, you know, fire engine stop sign red. It's not, you know, the traditional green. So it's very versatile. So again, this is one that I travel with a lot. Elf Wish is the multi-chrome in here. It's got some pink in it. It's really pretty. And then the other shade that I really like is Snowman. Unfortunately, they are not, I don't think, going to bring these palettes back again. They brought them back this past winter. They did sell out again. It's one of those, I hope they change their mind down the road. I think if people message them and bug them enough about it, they may bring them back. But yeah, these are, I haven't used the Christmas Eve one, which is more blue tone, but I love, love, love this palette. For Tarte is another one. I never use my Tarte palettes anymore. And I'm in my colorful era, so I decided to go with the Pro Remix, which isn't super colorful. But when this came out, it was colorful for Tarte, and I had to pick one because I have like 5 or 6. It still smells like vanilla. I like the original Tarteist Pro, but this one does have, how many mattes are in here? 1, 2, 3. It's very shimmer heavy, which for something like this would be like one shadow all over the lid type of a palette. So I went with that one for no other reason than, again, like I said, I have like 4 or 5 Tarte palettes and had to pick one. Nomad was hard. I ended up picking out my Haunted Europe. My friend Christine was kind enough to send this to me. She had 2 of them. I've been wanting this palette forever. I really like the lenticular on the outside. I have heard that they're planning on bringing this back this coming October, so I hope they do, because I was not the only one that was upset that they couldn't get a hold of it. I just like the color story. If you watch Betty Jean on Batty Bean is her YouTube name, she talks about like this side being, you know, the graveyard side and this side being the pumpkin patch side, which I do agree with that description. So you've got a little bit mauve-y, cooler toned, warmer, pumpkin-y. You can do a lot with this. I wear this palette a lot when I decide to do my makeup for work. This one and the Ghost Town palette. It's not the brightest, most, you know, original color story per se, but I like the way they executed it, like I said, with the cool side and the warm side. And there's a lot that you can do with it because it does run pretty deep. This Black Forest shade is actually like a charcoal, but it works really well to deepen up the outer corner. And then if I could read, that would be helpful. Dragsholm Castle is also a pretty dark brown shade, so if you're working in some of these warmer colors, so you can go pretty deep with it. And Nomad's formula is soft, it's buildable, so you're not going to get a lot and be like overly loud from the get-go, but you can build it up, so it's very like beginner friendly. So I like this palette, and I would be sad if I didn't have it, so that's the one I would keep. I'm going to try and go a little bit faster because this is going to be a long video. Sugar Pill. I picked the orange capsule. Again, I don't use my Sugar Pill palettes a lot. I do like the pink one. I have the pink one sitting out on my display, but I just like the more grungy fall-esque colors. You do have a blush in here, but you can also use this eyeshadow, so I went with the orange one for that. For Huda Beauty, I ended up picking the Mercury Retrograde. I only own 2 larger palettes. I have the Rose Gold Remastered and this one, and then the rest of mine are all mini. Their palettes are a little bit pricey, and as much as I like a lot of the newer ones she's come out with, there's other things that I've wanted over them, so that's the only reason. But I do really, really like this palette a lot, so I went with this one. Wander Beauty, again, I have like 3 or 4 palettes, so I ended up picking the Sweet Escape. This is the more lavender one. Some people didn't like this palette. I honestly have not used this one yet. I liked the color story of this one, so that's the only reason I picked it. There are palettes in here that I've never used, and I had to pick something, and I liked the color story. For ColourPop, I ended up going with the original Hocus Pocus. I was there when this launched. I was on there the first day when it crashed, and then went back on the second day. I had to take a break at work so I could buy this. I think that's part of it. I'm still bitter that I could not get the gel liners out of this collection, but I really like this palette. This got very mixed, like people loved it or hated the color story. I like that it's, you know, more neutrally on this side, but then you've also got the cranberries. I reach for this one quite a bit. This is one that I do wear a lot. I do like the one that they did for the second movie. It's like this, but it's a brighter version, but I think I would be sad if I didn't have this one, because again, I do use this one a lot throughout the year, whereas the brighter version, I think it came out last year, just kind of, or was it the year before? I don't even remember now. The bright one, I didn't find myself reaching for as much, where, like I said, this one I know I've used like throughout the year, like multiple years since I've had it. Did that ColourPop one come out last year? There was a lot of Halloween palettes this past year, a lot. As much as I love Halloween and horror, I really hope the makeup brands do not put out as many next year, because that started to get overwhelming, and then I just didn't want to use them, which is sad because I look forward to Halloween palettes. It was more special when less brands were doing them, and then everybody decided to jump on that bandwagon. Anyway, from, what is this called? This is Artist, is that what it's called? Oh, 35C. Why is that not on the back? I was going to keep the Boss Mood, and there's a palette from Melt I decided to keep instead that I think would fill the void. So this, I don't know, I've always liked the color story. I have 3 Morphe palettes still, so that's why Morphe is here. But this, it's got pinks, cranberries. This is a winter color story for me. Doesn't have to be, but that's, I think, because of the greens that are in here. But it's pretty. I have enjoyed all the looks that I've turned out with it. I wish they had the names printed on the plastic. That annoys me. There's a pressed glitter in here that's actually nice. So out of the 3 that I have, I went with this one. The Boss Mood, again, is the green one. But because I decided to keep Gemini from Melt, I have like 5 Melt palettes, and counting the Beetlejuice, this is the one, this is my most used Melt palette. So very, very grungy, pretty, still nice. I was watching some people's declutters. I've seen where some people's Melt shadows have molded. It's mostly in the original one with like the pot leaf where it's all shimmers, and then some Lorac palettes. I'm looking at everything now. This one looks fine, but that's why I didn't keep the Boss Mood. I went with this one because I kept the Gemini. Pat McGrath, I have 3. I ended up keeping, what is this called? Celestial Nirvana in Bronze Bliss. I got this in a BoxyCharm, and I think it's mostly special shades. This is really pretty. This is another one where I've taken it traveling. There's one matte, and then the rest are shimmers, but these are pretty, like, again, one shadow all over the lid, which is how I mainly use this. So again, this is my most used Pat McGrath palette, so I decided to keep that one. Natasha Denona, I decided to go with the retro palette. My mother-in-law got me this for my birthday, and then I also bought one from like Ipsy discounted, and I gave it to my mom for Christmas. So I do enjoy this color story. From Lime Crime, I decided to keep the greatest hits. I have a small palette and then 2 big ones, but because this has a bunch of different shades from various palettes, this seemed like the obvious choice. Beauty Bay, I decided to keep the Book of Magic. In the past, I think I picked the Me, Myself, and Mitchell, but I really like the color story of this, and it's got some really cool duochromes in it. I've really been liking this palette a lot recently, so I decided to keep that. I don't reach for the Mitchell one much anymore. It's a little bit thick and chunky, so I decided to go with this one instead. So if you've been watching the pile for ABH, I have 3 of these. I have 1, 3, and 4, and I was between this one and 4. 4 is the pink one. I don't own the purple one, which I think was 5. 3, it's very bright. Like I said, I'm back in my more colorful, getting in my colorful era. So again, this looks like an 80s dream, like exploded. So very, very pretty, very bright. The shimmers in here are nice. So that's the one I went with. For Glam Light, and this palette is the reason I didn't pick the Jawbreaker. So I ended up choosing the Rick and Morty, and I've used this one a couple of times recently, and I really like this. It's a little bit big. There's no shade names on here. I don't care much about the theming. My husband likes Rick and Morty. It's a little borderline disturbing if you've never seen it. It's not for the weak. There's some episodes that I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this information. So, but this is a really pretty rainbow palette, and the shimmers in here are really pretty. So yeah, this one's out of stock quite a bit, but they do bring it back. So if you see it, this is definitely a good rainbow palette. So I went with that one. Let's see, Ace Beauté. I have a lot of palettes from them that I've never used, that I refuse to declutter, but I have used this one. This is the Classical Paradise. I think this is their original formula, which I didn't have any problems with this. I got this from Ipsy on sale for like $9, but I love this fall color story. And this yellow in here is amazing. The shadows in here are so pigmented and they're easy to blend. I need to try some of the newer palettes that I have, because again, I don't think this formula was bad at all, and I know they've improved it since then, so definitely need to try those palettes. But yeah, I love the color story of this. This is one that I wanted forever. I finally got a hold of it like a year or two ago, so it's really, really good. Profusion. I went with the mauves. Again, I like the mauve palette from Huda Beauty, and because I could only pick one Huda palette, this kind of fills the void for that. And I do like this palette. Again, this is one that's easy to travel with and is a nice formula. You're not going to get a bad look from those palettes. Let's see, Dark and Glam. I also have 3. I went with the Conjuring Universe only because this is the largest palette of the 3 that I have, and this one has more color variety. That was the only reason, because I do really like the Goosebumps Haunted Mask one with the neons, but you have some bright colors in here, and then you also have some grungy dark shades, so picked that one for that reason. Lunar Beauty, I went with Moonspell. Again, this is probably my most used Lunar Beauty palette. I like the greens. Don't use the purples a whole bunch, but I do like the palette as a whole. This one has been retired, but I think you can still get it secondhand if you look on like eBay, Poshmark. I'm sure there's people selling them. At what price point, I don't know, because some people like to sell their stuff for outrageous amounts, but I think it's one, if you looked for it, you probably could find it secondhand. Juvia's Place, this palette's also been discontinued. This is the Tribe. I think they should bring this one back. I still really like this color story. I don't reach for Juvia's Place shadows as much as I used to, but out of the ones that I do own still, that one's still my favorite. I like bringing that one out in the fall. My allergies have just been atrocious. Our weather's been really erratic and windy and cold and rainy, and it's dusty down here. I do keep my Kleenex in my sports bra. Yes. I don't always have pockets, and then when I'm at work, I wear a long smock, so with kids and wearing like leggings, that's just where I keep my Kleenex. My husband tells me I'm an 80-year-old woman. It's fine. So from Lorella, I do have 3 palettes now from them because I got 2 in their subscription box, but I like the Sweetheart palette. I've used the green ones and I think they're good, but I think the pigmentation on this one's like a hair better, but we're also talking about bright pinks versus greens and browns, so apples versus oranges kind of a thing, but I like the color story on this one. And pink is one of my favorite. Pink and green are my favorite colors to wear, but I like this palette a little bit more just from the little bit that I've used it, so went with that one. Urban Decay, I think I've picked different palettes again for this type of video, but I ended up going with the Game of Thrones. I like this palette. Not everybody liked it, I think because it's shimmer heavy, but like right now doing one shimmer all over the lid has become popular, where at the time it wasn't as much, and because there's only 1, 2, 3, is there only 3 mattes? I think so. Is White Walker is I think it's a duochrome, is it? Kind of powdery. Yeah, I would consider that. It's got a little bit of a shift to it. So yeah, there's only 3 mattes. So I think that's part of the reason people griped about this. But I think now it wouldn't bother anybody. Because like I said, shimmer heavy looks are popular. So I like this. My husband got me into Game of Thrones. I started watching it when him and I started dating. So it's got some sentimental value in that regard. And I like that you've got, you know, the Iron Throne. It's bulky and cumbersome, but it brings me a lot of joy when I see it, and I still like this color story. And then another large palette. This is the last one from Too Faced. I picked their Then and Now palette. This came out in 2018. I think when I've done this in the past, I picked the gingerbread palette because that is one of my most used, but I've been keeping this one out. And I just like it. And again, it only has 3 mattes, so people did not like the size and they didn't like how shimmer heavy it was at the time. But I think now, wouldn't bother people. Mine still smells like vanilla. This was supposed to smell like birthday cake. I've never done a bad look with this palette. And again, I've been keeping it out in my display area just because I want to use it more. I miss it. So I picked this one this time. But yeah, let me know if you want to see the counterpart, or if I had to declutter a palette from each brand. And it would be the same rules. I have to have at least 3 palettes. So it would be the same brands that you see in front of me. But yeah, let me know if you want me to do that video, and I can definitely do that. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. You'll have to let me know what you thought of the palettes that I picked for each category. Was there any that surprised you out of the ones that I chose, if you stayed for the entire video? Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye everybody.